All right. Are we ready to start? Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar, Optimizing Your Distribution Network for Scalability and Resilience. We'll be talking about a lot of aspects of network analysis, and we'll explain that as we get into it. Just want to put out one thing. The information discussed in this session represents the views of the individuals and does not constitute legal advice or the views of Alpine. You should consult with your organization's leadership and legal counsel as needed for your specific situation. All right. Today's presenters are Phil Cortell. I'll let him introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Phil Cortell. I am a senior director at Alpine, and I've been doing distribution network and supply chain strategy, analytics and projects for dozens of companies over the last 30 years. Very familiar with how these projects need to work and flow through the entirety of the process in order to mutually justifiable results. Steve?
Yep, and I'm Steven Simonson. I'm a senior managing director at Alpine over the warehouse and distribution network outreaches. Between Phil and I think we've got 60 plus years of experience in this space. We have worked together for years and continue to do so. We'll be rolling through our distribution network, scalability, and resilience presentation, unless there's any questions. Okay, not seeing any. So we're going to go through questions to be asked, when to perform a network analysis, costs examined, supply chain framework, life cycle and methodology, example final results, and decision criteria, benefits, and then finally case studies. Throughout the process, if you feel like you have a question or don't understand something, please ask a question. We'll try and answer it right then and there. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Phil, and he can go through the deck.
Thank you, Steve. So when we think about and engage with our customers, our clients, we are looking at this framework as far as to be able to understand the requirements of a particular situation. We are looking to kind of in this pyramid definition, we want to make sure that we understand what the service requirements are for our customers, what are the metrics that need to be met, as that kind of drives the behavior and the costs of a distribution and supply chain network. From there, once we understand that, we are going to be analyzing and understanding the optimum number, location, and types of facilities through distribution network optimization. I like to call that kind of the math exercise of the overall effort that we're trying to understand that right balance of cost versus service versus investment to make the distribution network as resilient and as cost-effective as possible. To do that, we look at three major key categories of cost and service. Transportation management. What kind of modes do we utilize? Are we a parcel? Do we utilize parcel for small shipments? Are we mainly truckloads? We're moving large amounts of product between nodes during the course of our supply chain. Do we do a mix of modes within the cost within the supply chain in order to minimize our freight costs? How do we deploy our inventory? So that becomes a very important consideration to this, as do we fully stock all of our facilities across our supply chain network? How do we segment them if we do not? So we do have fast movers set regionally and then slow movers centralized. Do we have particular product types that are positioned close to market? Do we have manufacturing attached facilities so that we carry raw materials work in process near our manufacturing sites? So how do we deploy the inventory is important. How then do we operate our warehouses, our distribution centers? Are they flow through cross-dock facilities? Do they hold back stock? And the positioning and the labor availability in the different markets can trigger requirements such as, do I need to invest in more automation versus adding labor to my workforce? So all of those key considerations come into play when we're thinking about distribution network optimization. On top of that, it's not just sorry, Steve, go back.
Sorry.
On top of that, there's some fundamental foundational things that have to be put into play. The organization has to be able to adapt and be able to execute any kind of network infrastructure or supply chain adjustments coming out of these types of projects. It's one thing to do the analytics. It's quite another to execute those recommendations. And that becomes a key play as far as being able to take what your current state is, execute the recommendations, and have a more efficient and streamlined future state. And also, one key component is logistics information systems. Your WMS, your TMS, your ERP, order management systems all have to be able to support any type of changes or recommendations that come out of these strategic projects. And there has to be like an IT roadmap to be able to understand when and where these changes would be able to be implemented so that the execution of the full supply chain recommendations could be made. And any type of change that would be taken out of these types of projects and the recommendations have to be financially justifiable. How much investment can I make to execute and be able to enable these recommendations? Do I have the capital capability to make that happen? Just because it's financially justifiable doesn't necessarily mean that I'm willing to spend the investment to make it happen. So we have to strike that balance between OpEx, CapEx, service in order to come up with the right solution. So there are a lot of reasons why a network or a distribution strategy should be done. Several of these are listed here. It's not an all-encompassing list, but there's several different types of requirements or challenges that companies face that could trigger a requirement for a network analysis. One is that the flexibility for future demand. I can't meet my growth requirements, so I've got volume growth or a changing business model that might be happening. I might be merging, acquiring, or divesting from a particular part of my business. I want to enter into new markets, so my geographical reach is going to be stretched. So how do I handle that with my own infrastructure? Do I partner with a 3PL? Those types of things come into consideration. New distribution and fulfillment strategies. That was triggered several years ago by Amazon and continues to evolve. How do I distribute? How do I fulfill to make sure that the customer experience is as positive as possible in this new world, even post-COVID? It really drives a lot of changes and a lot of distribution network moves in order to I don't want to say keep up with the Joneses, but certainly want to become more towards bleeding edge versus a follower. There's things like contract renewals, facility lease expirations, etc. I might be seeing a drag in my service. So how do I adjust that? How do I address rising costs in my network? Big one this week, as all of you know, we had a change in executive leadership here in the States. So regulatory and market changes are sure to be coming up here very soon. New tariffs. Do I nearshore? Do I add more domestic supply? How does that impact my supply chain? All of these types of things are triggers for why a network analysis should be examined within the course of your business. So we talk about, obviously there's that balance of cost and service. Well, costs typically fall into these major categories. They can vary based on customer service requirements, based on industry, but typically you'll see kind of a ratio of your transportation spend is about double your distribution facility operations spend between your variable and fixed costs. So, we want to focus on those two major entities, but there's also inventory investment and carrying costs, things like reverse logistics, other functions within the network that drive costs as well. But a lot of these projects are very heavy data focus on the operational expenditures and the service requirements of the supply chain network. And this slide, what we're trying to show here is it's not just about transportation costs. There are a lot of subcomponents of that drive how costs are managed, how costs are incurred, and so forth, with regards to the type of product, distance between nodes, shipment frequencies, et cetera. That can drive, from the low end to the high end of that transportation cost range. Variable facility costs, all of your labor expenditures, how you pick and process within your distribution facilities, pallet moves versus unit picks can drive a lot of cost variation. Your inventory carrying costs, how long do you carry inventory? How much inventory do you carry between facilities? Are your sales aggressive or are they lagging? All of that can drive that. And then there are other, fixed costs around lease and utilities for your buildings and other miscellaneous charges.
And a lot of people, at this point kind of look at this and say, well, where do you get all this? Well, we ask you for it. We're going to give you a data request, and it's fairly daunting. And a lot of people are a little scared. Believe me, we never get it 100%. But if you look at the cost drivers, you can see those are the things that we're going to be asking for, pretty much every one of them. And if you don't have those, I would encourage you to get those all set and get them primed, because that's what we need to do in order to make the network project work, and have a good solution.
So we keep talking about that balance of cost. There's those different cost entities shown on the previous slide. As you add infrastructure, you see this. Well, I'm closer to my customer. I can reduce my outbound transportation. Absolutely correct. I get better response time. I get better service. But realize that my operating expenses, my inbound transportation, because I'm splitting shipments, my inventory carrying costs, because I typically have to carry more safety stock, counteract that benefit on outbound transportation. Service may trump all, and we may be towards the right-hand side of the curve versus the left. But typically, we're looking for that sweet spot. So you see the oval there. That's kind of that blended lowest cost option, assuming that we're meeting our service requirements.
Yeah, and service does drive a lot of these networks, especially these days with the Amazon effect.
Yep. So it's not obviously, we've developed these methodologies and this understanding over the course of our careers, but it's not just about, this methodology and process. Every customer that we interact with has different value chains, different ways that they go to market, different ways they interact with customers for the customer experience. So the table here to the right is more about, understanding what the customer brings as far as their value, what they want to do with regards to their customer experience across speed, service, and cost. Disruptive innovators, Amazon. They want speed and service. They want to get you your product, your orders to you as fast as possible, and they aren't as concerned about cost. They obviously streamline and drive costs down, but they're typically the innovators on that. And there are many, many others that go along with that. There are some that are innovators when it comes to promotions. So you see a lot of retailers that they're promo driven. It's some are lowest cost price and don't do the promotions. Others are very promotion related, especially as it comes to fashion. So you have that speed and service drive, especially as you're getting the new season of product out. But you are also keeping an eye on cost and not trying to be as speed and service driven across the entire year. You're more focused on different times during the year. A lot of firms are balanced, so they want to have that good service, lower costs, but they might not be as speedy as some of the companies up above. And then there are those that are low cost leaders. They drive costs out of their business, out of their supply chain, typically at the expense of efficiency and speed to customers. So those are typically the supply chain types we work with and understand, and we adapt and flex to what those requirements are. The other part of this is that variability can drive changes to all of these types of value chains. So the more unpredictable you are in your demand and supply variability, we all know that supply variability has been front and center over the past several years. That can drive behavior changes in these networks. Pre-buys and getting more stock in so we don't run out, making sure our fill rates are as close as possible to what they were pre-pandemic. Those types of things drove behaviors that might be outside of the typical value chain requirements of a particular business. And so we're looking to understand those impacts during these types of analyses and making sure that we are on point with what the business requirements are. So supply chain, the network design piece of this is the start of a journey. The one thing that Alpine does not want to do with our customers is create a network strategy. The journey, I'll get to your question in a second, but yes, the journey is very much beyond that to be able to execute on the recommendations of the network design. So I'm going to look for sites. I might choose a 3PL partner. I'm going to design my infrastructure to meet my business goals. And then I look at labor and availability and incentives in the different locations that I might want to place my new infrastructure. From there, I'm going to design and execute the infrastructure requirements, get them ramped up, and move forward with the design. This may happen many times over the course of the set of recommendations. I might need to add 3 buildings. So I do it, building 1, building 2, building 3. But I'm doing this as a journey. I'm not doing this as credenzaware. I don't want you to take the recommendations that we come up with as a team to make sure that we are that it just sits and gathers dust. It needs to be executed. There are typical real world benefits to doing this. And I'm sorry, I lost the question on the screen. Could someone repeat that?
Yeah, so the goal is to find that happy medium based on the overall goal of the business. And I was going to say, yes. And depending on if you're service or cost focused, they change dramatically. So Phil, if you
the goals of the business trump all.
Right.
How do you interact with your customers? What are the service requirements? What are the customer experience? That has to be front and center with everything we do. But at the same time, there is reality. I'm not going to spend $500 million on distribution infrastructure typically. So what do I need to do to take advantage of the infrastructure I have, as well as figure out that balance of how do I want to improve my service and at what cost do I make that happen? So yes, that happy medium is very important. So when we scope these projects, we are looking to interact with you before we even engage in a project to understand these different types of questions within these different categories. I mean, it's geographic focus. What is your current infrastructure? What do we need to put into scope with regards to manufacturing, distribution, cross dock, consolidation, deconsolidation centers, et cetera? What can we take advantage of that you already have in place? What channels are under study? Are we going to do a full omni-channel and look at everything, or is it an e-com focused or a retail focused type project? Are we looking at changes and shifts in our supplier base? Again, China tariffs may drive some behaviors that move our supplier base to other locations. So what are we doing there? Our customers are always evolving. So what are their expectations? What are their requirements? Are we getting new customers in areas that we never thought of before? Are we looking to improve service? If so, how? What types of products are we going to look at? Is it a specific product group? Are we looking at everything that you have? How are we flowing the products? Are we going all the way from point of raw material supply, or are we looking maybe at a port of origin through our distribution network? All of those can drive how the project evolves. Transportation, every mode that we have, all of our flows between facilities, between nodes. Are we trying to understand what customer pays for versus what we pay for as a business? And do we need to shift that balance and be able to understand those costs? How many SKUs are we looking at? I've done projects where we've had 2 million SKUs. I've projects where we've had 100 SKUs. And so that can drive, obviously, significant complexity, how we would have to aggregate our analytics to be able to account for everything. Our carrying costs, what's our working capital, how we deploy, that becomes a significant impact with regards to the different types of scenarios as far as how we position inventory, the types of products we move between facilities, so forth. What types of scenarios do we need to look at? Our customers have hypotheses. We want to make sure that we address those. We also bring a lot of experience from a lot of different industries to the table. So we'll have our own scenarios and thoughts as to how this might shake out. But what do we need to analyze and have the foundational facts to make a recommendation for change? There's always the in-source and outsource question. Where do we keep it in-house? Do we outsource it to a 3PL? Do we need to bring it back in-house from a 3PL? And then what is the data quality, and what are the systems available to support any infrastructure changes? Data is the foundation of these projects. As Steve mentioned earlier, we're going to ask for a lot of information, and it's used so that we do have a foundation that we can act off of to make sure that we are providing a financially and data-driven recommendation.
And typically, we're going to be asking for all this upfront prior to ever engaging. It helps us, to the point of the slide, scope the project, because some of these may not be important, some of them, they may all be important. That affects the timeline of the project based on whatever the answer is with the client. So that's where we actually do a lot of this and understand that prior to engaging. So.
Go ahead. So there's the how do we get prepared that we've talked about. What are we thinking about when we engage with our clients? But at the same time, we've over time, and Steve and I both utilize this methodology in order to execute the project. And so we talked about data collection, kicking off the project, defining business requirements. We kind of covered that to this point. We then take your data, validate it, make sure that what it shows reflects what actually happened to the business during the data period. We talk more and dig deeper into what the alternatives, the scenarios need to be as an initial scenario set. That isn't always the final scenario set. Most projects that I've ever worked, there are a lot of aha moments. We do some analytics and that's interesting. We should dig deeper here. So we have that initial strategic vision, but we're also building, analyzing scenarios and adding to that list as needed when we see things that might not have been obvious up front. From there, we kind of take the best set of scenarios and develop or formulate our strategy, our recommendations. What's the financial business case? What's the migration plan to get us from current state to future state, and the timing of that? What is our ROI, and what is the infrastructure changes? And it can be within the four walls. It could be retrofits. It could be additional automation. It could be new infrastructure. It could be changing of modes. All of these different things play into what the recommendation set would be.
Okay. And then a lot of people do ask, how much do we have to lift on this from a customer perspective? And the answer is there's a very big, heavy data lift in the beginning. We've had projects that they've gotten the data to us in 1 week. There's been some that it took them 4 weeks. And then we've got a combination of people for weekly meetings, but then we'll have like the visioning meeting and scenario analysis and presentation. We're going to want the leadership of the company there because there's going to have to be decisions made, and not including that leadership is a mistake, because once you get to the end of the project, people are going to ask, you're going to present this and people are going to say, well, did you look at this, and this? We'd rather have them part of the process so they already understand that question.
Be taken along, whether you internally update the executive team or whether we interact with them directly, they've got to come along with the journey, because they typically have questions that nobody else is thinking about, because they're thinking about the business goals. And obviously, we're talking about stakeholder discussions. It's not just about the data. We want to interact with functional leadership to understand challenges, concerns, how the supply chain is working, where it's falling short, all of those different types of things. It's a team process. If it's not a team process, these projects fail. So we want to integrate with you while we are there, excuse me, and be able to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing, how we're doing it, what the results are, where directions might need to shift a bit as we get more information during the course of the project, et cetera. But these are the types of folks that we want to be talking with initially and then throughout the course of the project. Obviously, the heavy hitters are the distribution, the transportation, and the inventory personnel and leadership. We're going to be interacting with them quite a bit. If there's a 3PL involved, we're going to want to interact with the folks that manage that relationship, and if we can, be able to understand what the 3PL is doing with you. But then all of these other functions have inputs. They have requirements that the supply chain delivers on, whether it's upfront with the procurement and suppliers, whether it's at the end with customer service, how we go to market and what our sales requirements are. We want to talk to the executive leadership. They typically drive the business goals. So what is growth? Are we going to acquire or divest from any part of our business, so on and so forth? The tax implications, the financial implications also play a role. We want to understand all your cost structures around facility P&Ls, your transportation spend, so that when we look at the data and analyze the data, we're matching what the business experienced during the course of the data period. To do this, beyond the interviews, we have a lot of project accelerators and tools. We can use commercially available network design package tools, Any Logistics, OptiLogic. Steve and I both have experience with formerly LLamasoft, now Coupa Supply Chain Guru. We just don't get access to it as much anymore as they've changed their pricing strategy, but we can certainly utilize that type of tool set as well. But we've developed a lot of our own proprietary things. Not every project requires a commercially available network optimization package. And so we've got a lot of tools, whether it's parcel optimization, parcel transportation optimization, capacity analysis and optimization tools. All of our strategic metrics, maps, et cetera. Sort of beyond, I'm going to interrupt this one because this one goes back to the previous slide. Beyond the tax infrastructure, I couldn't read the whole thing.
Government compliances that have an effect on the optimization, are they rolled in as well?
Yeah, if there are regulatory environments, pharmaceuticals is a big one. We definitely roll that in. Only certain facilities can host that type of product. I'm using them as an example. There's other, HIPAA requirements, food requirements, et cetera, that also play a role. But the way that the government's regulations play a role, we will definitely investigate those, make sure that we are adhering to those requirements before we would recommend any type of infrastructure change, or at least put into the migration timeline the additional time that would be needed to make those regulations a part of the new infrastructure. But yes, that is rolled into the projects as well.
We try and roll in everything that is possible in the next 5 to 7 years. And so that can be that, any mergers and acquisitions, things along those lines. We want to know all that up front before we start this.
Can you go back one, please, Steve?
Oh, okay.
I wanted to
Yep.
point out one more thing on that slide. So, as I said, it's not just about the numbers. We mentioned early on that not everybody has all the data. So we do have things like benchmark information, best practices, business case templates, et cetera, that also can drive, assist in these projects with regards to defining assumptions, filling in gaps with data, and then all of the change management, go forward planning tool sets as well. That plays a role as well. So just wanted to mention that before we moved on.
Okay.
So a couple of examples, I could spend a week on this stuff, but one example, when we look at kind of putting scenarios side by side, this example shows all the different components of cost, how they roll up to the different scenarios that were examined in this specific project, different locations that were employed and examined. The interesting part of this view is obviously the one on the right is the lowest cost, but one of the big benefits is the two lines are capacity. And so utilization of different facilities within the network. And the lowest cost also opened up the most capacity. And so it was kind of a no-brainer to look at that scenario 2B and move the potential scenarios that we would recommend. Obviously, everything else has to be balanced. The CapEx, the service, that all plays a role. There are qualitative aspects that we'll get into here in a minute that also play a role. But this one was an interesting one that the lowest cost also provided the best benefit as far as capacity. But it's more than just cost. And so typically what we will do is we will take all of the numbers, the financial results, and then all of the different qualitative aspects that we work together with our clients to weight. So we've got that weighted kind of percentage there on that second column to the left as far as what's important as far as the network. So operating cost was very important. Capacity was very important. Business continuity was very important. Those were the three drivers. And then there is also complexity, the capital cost, the startup risk that filled out the qualitative aspects of this scenario look and the scenario comparison, excuse me. And so we did just a simple, it's not a great, that category is not handled well in this scenario. So you see the down red arrow. This category is handled well within that scenario. So you see the up green arrow, and then the sideways yellow arrows are kind of neutral. And so you put all that together with the numbers, and we come together with the team to make a recommendation or set of recommendations. That maybe there's a couple scenarios that rise to the top, and we have to do a tiebreaker around maybe site selection or labor availability in a market. There are also strange categories that we've had during at least the course of my career, where a executive leadership had a ski chalet in Aspen. What's the opportunity to be in Denver? Those types of things can play a role. It's not very common, but there are things that are outside the typical view that we look at that have to be considered sometimes. And so we flex and we make sure we address those considerations as well.
And in Phil's example, what we do is we throw that into the model and we show the cost impact of having something in a specific spot, other than doing like just a wide white paper of what it should look like. And then people can make decisions, because obviously this is a tool to be able to make decisions strategically for the company. So the other one that comes up a lot of times is you've got all your costs and service, you want to say 2 days, but sometimes they'll come back and say, well, if we go to 3 days, we're going to save X millions of dollars. So I think we're going to go and do that. So those decisions also get made.
So we kind of worked through what the cost drivers are, how we do the project, how we compare scenarios. What do we get out of it? This is, again, broad brush here, but typically most of the time we see like 10 to 15% total supply chain cost reduction if we're looking for a cost reduction opportunity. We may actually end up adding cost in certain circumstances. We want to drastically improve our service. We want to optimize our infrastructure that we have right now. So we don't want to invest, and we're willing to take the operating cost hit in order to make that happen. So there are certainly examples where the cost reduction doesn't necessarily materialize, but those are specific to the business requirements and the goals. All of these different blocks that surround that center block are benefits that we have seen in different projects. They don't necessarily all come to light. You never get all 10, but you definitely see benefits in these different categories when we do these types of projects. So a couple of case studies, worked with a home supply network, wholesale, that did direct to work site deliveries. So they had several dozen branches, and they had an acquisition. So there's a lot of overlap with regards to the facilities that were in markets delivering the same type of product. And so where were the opportunities to consolidate deliveries, potentially consolidate branches to be able to make sure that we can reduce operating costs and reduce our delivery spend. And so we saw opportunities to increase consolidated deliveries to work sites because these companies carried the same SKU. And so what can we do to potentially consolidate? So we saw a 5% increase to do that. We consolidated the network by 30 to 40 branches. And so that allowed us to reduce our facility operating costs by 12 to 18%. And then we also reduced our fleet costs by 3 to 5%. So brought inventory volumes down, brought our facility operating costs down and fleet costs while reducing our deliveries. And finally, we had a discount retailer. And so we looked at a lot of capacity with regards to the ability to take our existing infrastructure, utilize it more effectively versus maybe splitting our current one site distribution and moving it to two sites. So it was the decision was made that it made more sense not to stay in the middle of the country one site, but to reduce risk, to be able to meet retailer growth, to split it into two DCs, 1 million square foot site on the east, 500,000 square foot on the west. Develop the migration timeline to build the eastern DC first, then the western. It was a pool point type network, so it was line hauls to pool points and then final mile delivery to the stores as well, and then also be able to set up the facilities to be more adaptive. E-commerce in their realm wasn't as strong, but they wanted to get there over time. So they wanted to be able to flex and be able to handle future e-com business as part of this overall solution. So the investment paid dividends. It was about a 35% IRR. We reduced transit time to stores. We reduced operating costs. And we saw a simple payback improvement, as well as being able to deliver more volume to stores through the pool points versus the current network, which was a lower cost option. So that's kind of how we go about doing these things. A lot goes into it, much more than we can cover in a short 45-minute period with you. But we would love to address any questions you might have about what you've heard or any specific details you might have about your business and your situation. We'd love to hear that right now.
Not seeing any questions roll in, so. So we'll just kind of, the next
Wait.
what,
What? There's
what,
one there.
what, okay,
Typical first step. I think that, we've got a gentleman, or a sales director, Paul Gettert. He manages kind of our initial, inquiries, and making sure that, we understand what your requirements are, what the needs are with regards to your business. He would work with either Steve or myself to, bring us in to engage with you, and then we'd start digging into kind of those questions so that we could properly scope and define what the project needs to be. And we would go in and then, work with you, provide a data template so that you could start gathering the information that we would need. That is not a you go off and do your thing and come back. We work with you quite closely, as there are kind of specific ways the data needs to be structured. We want to make sure that we're getting the information that we need and that we understand where you have gaps. And so all of that plays a role. Obviously, if you like what you hear, you like, the financials that go along with how we would do this project, we would then engage and work through the methodology that we went through today. Yes, we can provide assistance. Typically, there are big data elements with that. So getting into your BI systems, your WMS, your ERP, a lot of that holds some of the big data sets that we need. We would provide you a detailed data template, and we could walk with the folks that are pulling the data out of your systems. But we can certainly make sure that whomever you have, that would be the person that would be pulling the data. We're making sure we're giving them all the ammunition they need to do it as correctly as possible the first time. We don't want to have multiple cycles of data pulling. We want to make sure that we get the information we need on one go. So we look at sample data pulls. We might pull 1,000 sample records with the different fields that are needed. And we look at that and say, yep, that's exactly what we need. Or no, can you add this field? We don't need these two fields. This record type doesn't look right. Whatever it is, we want to make sure that we do that before you go and pull a million record file and have it be wrong. So we try to work with you to make sure that we're getting the information we need up front before you're doing these big data pulls.
and once you receive this, like I said earlier, it's quite a daunting document, and nobody's going to get everything in there. And then we just find out the ones that are critical, and we all kind of pull together and come up with good, solid assumptions based on what we've seen in the industry and your experience with your company. So that's kind of where we're at. We try to also fill in the gaps on data. If you can't get something done, we try as hard as we can to help you. Typically, this part of the project is we're not engaged, we're not billing, because it just has to happen before we have to make sure that we've got this data and it's correct before we really start billing.
The other aspect to it is where you don't have information. I mentioned earlier project accelerators. We have benchmarking data. We have methodologies that we've employed because typically, there are certain data elements where most folks don't have it. So we've developed methodologies to work around that, to fill in the gaps. And so, we communicate with you. Well, all right, you don't have this. This is how we would approach it. Is that acceptable? Make assumptions, show the methodology, show the benchmarks, so that our clients understand how we're going about this, and they can poke holes in our methodology and say, no, we don't like this, but if you could do it this way, this other way, it would be beneficial for us. We do that all the time. So
yeah.
While the data request is daunting, it's not that, oh, we can't do this project with you if we don't have everything. That's not the case at all. We'll tell you if the information falls short, and then we will work with you to fill in those gaps as required.
Right. And it's, that's our experience in doing this for as long as we have. We've probably seen every different aspect of people's data that where we've had to fill in the holes and where we haven't. And, you know, we help as much as we can trying to fill that gap. Any other questions? Giving people time to type. Not seeing anything coming in. All right. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining the webinar today. This will be out on our website if you wanted to pass it on, share it, or watch it again. If you watch it again, you have questions, again, get in touch with Paul Gettert. His number and his email are on the screen, and he can get you pointed in the right direction. All right. Thank you very much.